This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 742, part 2, entitled Politicians Learn Biconsciousness and Set Up GECs, GECs, in the parliaments, or see your populations die off. Continuing straight on. So, obviously, the divorce courts must be thoroughly reformed to remove what the MGTOWs and Masculists refer to as divorce rape, which is what happens to one father in 4. That is millions of men daily, the dominant gender political horror of our times. One father in 4. So how to get rid of this horror? By the fipping of women. That is a major and fundamental restructuring of society, by applying powerful masculinist moral pressure on a woman to fip up. That is, to bother to get a career competent education at high school and college so that she can be a fip as an adult and not expect, fluffy style, to parasite off the money and labour of a man, thus making her the hated enemy of the masculists, who are at war against such women and aim to wipe them out of the gene pool by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, spat at, utterly rejected both socially and sexually. Masculists are in a position to force, capital letters, women to fip up, and that is to teach young men masculist ideas via the internet, that is the manosphere, that is men on the internet who talk about men's gender issues such as divorce, rape, man's slavery, forced fathering, etc. When nearly all men have been masculisted, that is taught that women oppress men worse, then fluffies can no longer exist, since a fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some gullible, stupid, ignorant, in brackets of MGTOW and masculist ideas, man-slavable man who is prepared, or rather brainwashed, to work for her for decades while she sits on her pretty little princess ass and lives off his money and labour. Masculists are abolitionists who see manslavery as 1,000 times worse crime than was Negro slavery in the US in the early 1800s. The immorality of Negro slavery was the root cause of the US Civil War that killed over 600,000 US soldiers. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies and are at war against them, aiming to wipe them out by totally ignoring them. Women now have a life expectancy of 85 years, thanks to men's discovery of science-based medicine. Men gave women the pill, household gadgets, higher education, so most women today choose to have 0, 1 or 2 kids. This has caused the masculists to stand up, pointing the finger at women, saying in outraged terms, quote, "Now that you women can work, you must work. Anything else is man's slavery, and man's slavery is slavery, and hence hated and a war issue. You women will fip up. You will stop manslaving and divorce raping men, or you will die slow, miserable deaths rotting on the shelf, since men, masculisted men, will not go near you, seeing you as manslaving, divorce raping, forced fathering vermin, to be hated and exterminated by total male neglect." Masculists claim that monoconscious feminists, in brackets that is, those for whom the only gender politics they have heard of is feminism, close brackets, are indirect genociders, wiping out whole populations due to them preaching monoconscious feminism to young women, making them repulsive to young men, who then refuse to date them, who ignore them, who then choose to live the MGTOW lifestyle. Thus the masculists are pushing the politicians to think masculist. Since modern feminism has been around for at least 6 decades, most politicians are already fairly familiar with feminist arguments. So the masculists have a major task ahead of themselves, and that is to educate the public and the politicians into masculist thinking. That is, to make the public and the politicians bi-conscious. That is, to become as familiar with masculist ideas as feminist ideas, so that one sees that gender oppression is a two-way street and that women oppress men far worse. These now bi-conscious politicians then need to set up GECs, that's GECs, that's Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is not the case today in today's gynocentric society in terms of the level of awareness of men's gender issues. The male half of these GECs will then set out to men-fair the gender laws, especially with the massive injustice that occurs in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, who still operate on the fluffy model for women, who see women as fluffies and men as cash machines, put on this earth to pay for women to have babies. These bi-conscious masculist male politicians will push for the fipping of women, for the creation of a FIP society, so that all women are socialised and educated to be FIPs, so that they don't parasite off the labour and money of a man for decades of his life. The divorce courts can then be thoroughly reformed, basing them on the principle of financial independence of both divorcing parties. That is, that women, mothers, are expected to be FIPs, so they don't have to parasite off the money and labour of a man. The politicians will have no choice about this. Either they push for the fipping of women and the men fairing of the divorce courts, or they will see their populations die off as young men continue to boycott marriage and paternity, seeing both as leading to a 1 chance in 4 of being butchered in a hated, fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court. The politicians in the GECs will then systematically remove those gender laws that discriminate against either sex. For men, that will involve legislating the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, that will give men the same right to reject an unwanted pregnancy that women already have, called the MARA, maternity rejection right, aka abortion right. The fact that women have the MARA and men don't have the PARA is the, capital letters, most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, that fills masculists with a sense of burning injustice, making them murderously hateful against it. The GEC masculist politicians will also legislate the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births, to block women's horrible gender crime of paternity fraud, in brackets, where the woman lies to her man that the kid growing in her is his when she knows it's not, close brackets. Masculists want paternity fraudster women to be put in jail for 15 years for a gender crime that is worse than rape, which typically gets a man a 10-year jail sentence. Masculists educate young women to be bi-conscious by teaching them masculist ideas, so that they can see that in reality women oppress men far worse and lose their monoconscious feminazi bitchiness towards men for the ways that men oppress women, by understanding that women oppress men worse. So they see that when monoconscious feminists trash men publicly for the ways that men oppress women, that this is deeply hypocritical, given that women oppress men far worse. Masculists can also force monoconscious feminists to become bi-conscious by targeting the monoconscious male feminist boyfriends of these monoconscious feminists, teaching these men masculist ideas so that these men become bi-conscious. If their feminist girlfriends don't become bi-conscious before, in capital letters, these men do, then the monoconscious hypocrisy and bigotry of their feminist girlfriends will cause these men to become disgusted with their monoconscious feminist girlfriends and then dump them. When millions of monoconscious feminists have been dumped and they then see their ex-boyfriends starting up relationships with bi-conscious feminists, that will strongly motivate them to become bi-conscious themselves. These bi-conscious feminist women will then be a lot more sympathetic towards the masculist push for the men fairing of the gender laws and will join forces with the politically minded masculists in pushing the politicians to establish GECs in the parliaments, and will vote with men for the men fairing of the gender laws, especially for the fipping of women, for the reform of the divorce courts that cause most young men to boycott marriage and paternity, and the systematic removal of gender laws that discriminate against men. When there are enough bi-conscious women and plenty of masculists, the politicians will feel the political pressure on them to remove those gender laws that discriminate against either sex, thus causing young men to see that divorce is no longer toxic for men, since women are FIPs, the para and the OPTAB have been legislated, and that GECs have been established. With divorce no longer toxic for men, young men will be a lot more willing to be fathers again. With a hefty maternity wage, free education, and national health insurance, having a kid will be a lot less expensive, so couples will be able to afford having their second kid, as governments will increasingly push them to do, with publicity campaigns that stigmatise those couples who refuse to have their 2 kids, in brackets, their civic duty, close brackets, with labels such as life leechers, who parasite off the sacrifices of their parents made in raising them, but who don't make the same sacrifices for the next generation. Masculists are very conscious that gender politics for men must become, in quote, in capital letters, a lot more political. Laws must be changed. Society must be reformed, fundamentally restructured, so that the gender laws are made fair to men and to women. Men need the para and the OPTAB. Women need the maternity wage, and parents need free education and national health insurance. Paying for all this will increase the tax burden significantly, making the Nordic countries' tax rates the new norm, and more. But we have no choice. If we don't do these things, that is, become bi-conscious and set up GECs in the parliaments, as stated in the title of this flyer, then the politicians and the public will see their populations die off, as is happening now, with the planet's most rapid population decline being in South Korea, which will be the first country in the world to disappear if current trends continue. To avoid this, politicians need to become bi-conscious and then to shift their asses to do what is necessary to stop the current trends that are wiping out whole populations. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In brackets. Click on the Masculist tab for 740 plus Masculist essays and their videos. Google the terms London Real and Hugo de Garis to see videos on masculism at AI will kill 1 billion people dash. Do we create our exterminators? Question mark. Professor Hugo de Garis dash London Real in brackets. See the last half hour of this 2-hour interview for the Masculist segment, close brackets, as well as Countdown to Extinction, How AI Will Exterminate Mankind, again for the last 40 minutes on masculism. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey, MGTOW.tv, X and YouTube. I have nearly 1,000 Masculist videos in 15 playlists on YouTube that can be accessed by searching for the channel name Garis Masculist Videos. That's all one word. All 1,000 of my Masculist videos in one long list in most recent first time order can also be found on X by searching the channel name Garis Masculist Videos. That's 4 words. Ciao.